Good evening, respected viewers. This is George from Ireland, and this video is about Robert Mugabe and his legacy. So we know that President Mugabe resigned yesterday evening, and not before time. 37 years he ruled the country, 27 of those as president. Age 93, he's the oldest head of state in the world. Pretty soon, Her Britannic Majesty will overtake him. She's 91 at the moment. So many people would regard Mugabe's signal achievement as ending white rule. In 1965, there was the UDI in Rhodesia, as it was then called, and about 6% of the population were white, and they virtually monopolised political power. There are a few black people in parliament. The black community was over 90% of the population, had a small amount of representation. There were chiefs, hereditary rulers, who were supposedly running a parallel legal and political system for the black majority. Many people say that was largely balderdash. They were just government collaborators who were going along with this system which was not treating black people well. Anyway, so Mugabe led that rebellion, and he ended that system. Strictly speaking, in a way, he didn't end white rule. Whites ended it for themselves because the Rhodesian Front government of Ian Smith was under such pressure from Zanla and Zipra attacks. In 1978, a new constitution came in, and 2/3 of the parliament was black, 2/3 of the cabinet, the prime minister was black. And so Smith had made these concessions, which went much further than things he'd rejected in 1965, because the military situation was crumbling. Zanla and Zipra were about to be victorious. He was obliged to try and meet black opinion halfway, bring in some moderate nationalists. Some people say these were stooges, and they were just a black mask for a white government. Anyway, as one black Zimbabwean friend said to me, that the British and the UDI era were racist, exploitative, and far better than anything Zimbabwe had before or since. So you see the tremendous economic development, the advances in science, education, and technology, and so forth. But it's true that the country was mainly run for the benefit of a small racial minority of immigrants. Not that being an immigrant is a bad thing, but they were not indigenous Zimbabweans, and some of these whites were very conceited and lording it over the autochthonous people. Now, it's true that people are primarily actuated by self-interest, and that explains a lot of why Mugabe held some support right to the end. I've got to ask myself some awkward questions. If you're a Zimbabwean, the only way to get a decent standard of living really was to be an instrument of oppression for Mugabe's apparatus, to be in the military, the police, the CIO, the bureaucracy, something like that. Or it was either that or live in dire penury. And most people are not willing to put up with abject poverty. These people who work for him, did they realise they're doing it for unethical reasons? Did they fool themselves? Did they actually believe in it? Probably some of all that going on. It was unsafe to criticise him. You get a royal thumping from the police. So people trick themselves and end up actually believing it. They constantly propagandise he's a good person, and they just deny reality. They can be purblind to it. And it was fascinating to meet some Zimbabwean students in China, some of whom were vociferous supporters of Mugabe. But now these people have voted him out. Those who always said he was so wonderful, been dancing in the streets, extraordinary scenes in the ZANU-ZAPU conference. Anyway, in fairness to Mugabe, he improved education. But education was improved in virtually every other country in the world since 1980. So that's not really a unique accomplishment. And Mugabe, you can say anything else about him, but he wasn't an idiot. He was a highly articulate man. He had a stellar mind. No one could dispute that. He was autodidactic in law and other subjects. And he considered himself to be a sincere Christian. Incidentally, his children were born in marriage. They were born in another man's marriage. He started having this liaison with his current wife when she's married to somebody else. Now, I don't think that reflects discredit either of them, really. I mean, that's probably the least immoral thing that he did. As I say, he was someone who preached reconciliation in the early days, and he was hailed throughout the length of Africa as a hero. And he ended up by blaming whites, and then the white community almost completely disappeared, and then moved on to the Indians, so I heard, but tried to curry favour with the Chinese government. You know, Mouseface is still on the banknotes in China, despite killing 20 million of his people. Mugabe must have thought, wow, I want to be like that. But let's be fair to Mugabe, his killing wasn't quite so prolific. I went to a speech by the late and unlamented Ian Smith in the Oxford Union in 2001. And Ian Douglas Smith, he spoke there, and he'd been at dinner have been several black people at the table. So his racism seemed to be patronising rather than malicious. And he said that the Zimbabwe under him had the fewest police per capita in the world. The people were happy. One might have expected there'd be jeering from some of the Zimbabweans in the audience, but actually there wasn't. And it was astonishing to meet Zimbabweans abroad. One of them, well, at least more than one of them, as I said, was an outspoken admirer of President Mugabe, saying that even Ian Smith did a few good things for the country. And I was bowled over to hear that, because Ian Smith was considered to be a folk devil by black Zimbabweans and even a few whites. Why did some black people fight for Ian Smith? And again, people are largely driven by incentives. A lot of them lived in poverty. They were offered a decent salary, status, the uniform, just a job. Many people apolitical don't think about these things. So some of the people who would have worked for Ian Smith would also have worked for Mugabe even right to the end, not just in the early 80s when he seemed to be decent. So yeah, a lot of people don't give this a second thought. They just go along with what's in their immediate self-interest. And what would I do in that situation? I don't like the answer, Would I work for him just so I wouldn't go hungry? Know I was doing something unethical? Would I trick myself into believing that it was something morally good? Maybe I would, trying to exaggerate his good points, try to de-emphasize the wickedness he'd done. So what happens now? He was going to be impeached. He obviously resigned because he knew what the result that was going to be. Trouble is, the new man is coming in, Emerson Mnangagwa, probably mispronouncing it. He's up to his eyeballs in blood. Everything Mugabe did, he was an accomplice in. In fact, he could even be charged as a principal, not an accessory to many of these things. So he's reaffirmed that this amity with China is central to their foreign policy. However, he's indicated he wishes to build better relations with Occidental countries. Will he rejoin the Commonwealth? Quite possibly. In a fit of pique, Mugabe withdrew from the Commonwealth as being neo-colonialist. Didn't bother him for something like 35 years. All of a sudden, it was a huge problem. He'd even hosted the Commonwealth Conference in about 92. There were the Harare Principles of Democracy, ironically, as they were promulgated in his capital, when he was cheating only a little bit in elections in those days. So there we're there. I think Mugabe will live out the rest of his life in comfort in Harare, probably succumb to prostate cancer within the next few months. So obviously very glad to see the back of him. No dynasty being created. So he took a quite prosperous country, which really had a lot going for it in terms of farmland, natural resources, and he turned it into dystopia. And people are really elated to see him gone. He well overstayed his welcome in office. I hope his like is not seen again. He seemed to be the only man in the world who ever had a moustache on his philtrum, and only on his philtrum. That's exactly here. What was all that about? So I wish I could say that the future looks rosy under this new person. However, I think it improbable. I really want to be pleasantly surprised. So that's all about Mugabe.